We're going live now.
We can wait like 1 minute or so, just like to let some more people feed in, I guess.
Okay. Are we live, by the way?
Let me check real quick.
Check the stream.
Yes.
Okay.
It looks like,
Awesome.
yep. Nice. I see it. We can wait like 1 minute or so, just like to let some more. Okay. And then also we should mute. If we're watching it, then we should mute it on our end so that it doesn't pick up on the microphone.
Let me just try to figure out a good way, because there is a slight delay to the YouTube live.
Yeah, there is.
So that I don't know if I should include your audio or not, because it's going to be awkward hearing it twice.
There's like a doubling up. This is truly awful.
So let me just turn off the audio for.
Okay, that's fine.
Audio.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. You got it. You got it. It's all. You got it.
Okay. Should we get started?
Let's do it.
Okay. So hello everyone, and welcome to Flutter. So we can go ahead and get started. So I just want to break down the plan real quick. So this is going to be a 4-part series, possibly 3. I just wanted to add the extra part because the final app we'll be making is a little bit big. So I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to get to everything. So for this first one, we're just going to have a quick little intro to Dart or to Flutter through these slides, and then we're going to go into a Dart primer where I'll teach you the Dart language. After that, then in the next session, we'll go over Flutter widgets, which are the building blocks of how to make a mobile app, and then we'll go through our final app together. So let's start off. So what is Flutter? So Flutter is Google's UI design framework for building beautiful, natively compiled applications for web, mobile, and desktop. Now, web and desktop aren't in production build, so they're still in beta, but those should be coming out soon in the next year or two. So then we're mainly going to be focusing on mobile as well. So the benefit of Flutter is that you only have to write code once for making an app in both iOS and Android. Now, typically, you would have to make an iOS app separately, and then you would have to code in Java or something else for Android after that. The Flutter gives us the ability to really easily make an app that is cross-platform. So it simplifies the development process significantly. So let's go over why we would want to use Flutter. So the first thing is how fast the development is. So as I said, we have a single code base. This makes developing the app super fast. It also has something called hot reload, and we'll go over that later on when we're developing apps and working in Flutter. But essentially what it means is that we don't have to recompile the entire app every time we make a single change. For example, if you want to maybe make a button larger, we don't have to wait maybe those 5 seconds just to reload the entire app. As soon as you click save, the app will re-render on its own. The other reason is because it's also really easy to learn. So Flutter uses Google's own language called Dart, and Google made this as a very easy to learn language that takes a bit from Java, Python, JavaScript, which are some of the most popular languages out there. So it makes it really fast to pick it up. Additionally, it also works really well with Firebase. So while Flutter is a front-end framework, meaning you can create a really nice looking user interface and make buttons and do a bunch of stuff, the thing is that none of your data ever gets saved, meaning if you come back to the app, your entire app will be restarted. But with a backend, by using another Google service called Firebase, those changes you make can be saved and you can create users and login forms and whatnot. So the other reason to use Flutter is also because it has an expressive and really flexible UI. So Flutter allows for full customization of every single widget. If you want to change the color of a button, you can. If you want to add rounded colors or elevation, you can do that as well. And every single thing that we'll be using, called widgets, will always have these properties that allows us to customize it to whatever use case you might want to make. It also has a super responsive UI. So a very common problem when it comes time to developing mobile apps is every single phone has a different size and shape. If you look at, say, just someone else in your family, for example, might have a completely different size phone than you. They might have a bigger phone or a smaller phone. The issue when it comes time for developing is that usually you have to specify pixel lengths and widths. So that means that whatever your app looks like on one phone might not show up the same on another. But because of the way Flutter works, it allows us to build apps really easily that looks pretty consistent across every single type of phone you might be working with. So it creates a really generic way for your app to look. Finally, it's also extremely beautiful out of the box. So Google's material design, which is a way that Google had released for a design, I suppose, a way to design apps and websites that Google had released that looks amazing. And the best thing is that it comes straight out of the box. When you make a button, it's automatically made to look like the way Google had originally wants to make it look like in material design. It also has Apple's Cupertino. So whenever you have modals and different screens, you can make it look like Apple's Cupertino as well. So you can make Apple users feel at home as well. The other great thing about Flutter is that it has a great community for developers. So when I first started using Flutter, which is about during the summer, a few months ago, I started running into a lot of issues. But the really great thing about Flutter is that it has grown extremely fast. Flutter went into production only in 2017. And since then, it has a massive community, meaning every single time I ran into an issue, I could just Google it and there was already an answer there waiting for me. Not only that, but Google says that there are 500,000 developers using Flutter every single month. And according to LinkedIn, it's the fastest growing skill in software development. Meaning if you learn this now, companies in another 2-3 years will be wanting Flutter developers. So you'll be ahead of the curve and ready to show off your Flutter skills when it comes time to getting a job. So like I said, we're going to go through these slides really quick because I want to get to the hands-on portion and start learning Dart, because that's sort of the whole point of today's lesson. And if we can get a chance, I want to make sure we go into learning a bit more about Flutter as well. So let's have a quick little overview over how to use Flutter. So everything in Flutter is a widget, meaning every little small component, whether it be a text or a button or a container, those will all be called widgets, and we'll see how they work in the next few slides. So on the left here, we can see a nice little, I suppose, phone that I had created using Google Slides, using a couple boxes, which will help us show how Flutter works with widgets. So this whole screen right here, we can call it the root widget. It essentially contains everything that we might have in our app or on this screen. Now, within this root widget, we have something called an app bar, which is this top little square right here highlighted. So this app bar is nested within our root widget. And within this app bar widget, we then have some text, which is nested within the app bar widget. So I hope what you can start seeing is that what you really have right here is just a bunch of widgets nested within each other. And the relationship is what we'll come to find is a parent-child relationship, where our app bar has a child property, which we'll go over, that is this text, and that makes it so this text will show up within this app bar. Now, if we go a little bit further down the page, we'll see we also have a big amount of space underneath the app bar, which we'll call a container. And within this container, we then have another set of a text widget, which will then again be a child of the container. So from this whole app, we see how we have this big relationship here, where we have a central root widget, and then underneath that, we have this app bar at the top. Within that app bar, we have a text. And then underneath, also in the root widget, we have a container that contains this text within it as well. So what I hope you guys are starting to see here is that everything is just nesting in within itself. And of course, well, you guys might seem a little confused, like, this is a lot to process. When we start getting down to actually using Flutter, see that there's nothing much to be confused about. So I really quickly wanted to go over the widgets a little bit more. So these are examples of a few more widgets. We have a text, we have a button, a row, a column, and an image. And these are actually what they'll be called, and they do exactly what you might expect. A text will display some text. And along with this text, we have some properties that we can specify. We can specify the style, for example. We can say that, what do you want the font weight to be? Do you want it to be bold, or do you want it to be thin? You can also say how you want it to be aligned. Do you want it on the left, center, right, justified? You also have a few more, like overflow. What happens if you run out of space? Do you want it to wrap down to the next line? And whatnot. And the list goes on in terms of properties for text. We also have a few more properties for the button widget. Say I want this button to instead be blue instead of red. I can specify that by using this color property. I also have an elevation. How much is it raised off the screen? If it's disabled, we can specify if it's enabled or not. We can do that. We can also say what it looks like if it's disabled. Do you want it to be gray? Do you want it to be red? Also, we can say if its shape. Do you want it to have a rounded corners or a complete circle? So what you'll start to see is that every single one of these widgets, whether it be row, column, image, button, text, they all have these properties that we end up being able to specify so we can change the way it starts to look. So I hope I'm not going too fast, but I wanted to also just go ahead and show you what we'll be building in the end. So this will be a travel app, and as you can see, we have capabilities to do a little bit of searching, clicking, and looking at each country, and we'll be able to use an API that actually pulls this information from the internet. And here's just a few screenshots too, if that GIF was too fast for you. So we have this front page that will have a few different countries listed, an explore button. It'll take us to a search bar. Let us search through all the countries we have, displaying their flags. And then when we click on them, we'll be able to see this screen on the right, which gives a bit of information from an API. So again, I know I went through these slides really fast, but I definitely want to get to the hands-on, which is the Dart primer. And the reason why is because once we start using Flutter, a lot of this will make sense. But the big stuff I want to make sure you understand is that what Flutter is all about is these things called widgets. So let me go back to the URL real quick. So what I want you guys to do, if you guys could split the screen of this current recording and also with another tab that has this URL called dartpad.dev. When you go here, you'll be able to see this screen right over here, so we can start working with the Dart language and go over some of its syntax. So I'll go ahead and wait a little bit for you guys. So remember, it's called dartpad.dev, and kind of split it horizontally if you want, or vertically. Decide how you want to have it set up.
I can go ahead and post a link if you want.
Yeah, that would also be great. Thank you, Cecilia.
Yeah.
I just want to wait to make sure everyone's at this point. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started here. So let's break down what we're seeing automatically. So we see we have this word called void, and we have our main right here. So what I'm assuming is we have some people who are in Comp 110, and you guys have some experience with Python, and we have other people who have taken Comp 110 earlier, and you guys were in TypeScript, and we probably have a lot of people all over the place in terms of syntax and what languages they may know. Luckily, Dart is a very, very easy to learn language, and I'll be sure to take it slow, make sure everyone understands how to use it and the very basic fundamentals so we can make sure we're ready for Flutter. And the other thing to remember is, in terms of what we need to actually know for using Flutter, it's not too many of these concepts, but I want to make sure you guys know them so you are ready in case you might want to use them later on. And of course, when we start going over Flutter and actually working in IDE and building some widgets and different apps, we'll of course go back over these just when going through them. So right now we see we have a main function, which is the start of our program, and it's running and it's going to return this thing called void. You don't have to care too much about that for now if you don't know what it means. So within these parentheses, this is our function. So if you're used to Python, these not parentheses, but brackets, I should say. These brackets are something you're not really familiar with, but brackets are how we denote how to nest what's happening. So this main is a function, and everything that happens for this main function will happen within these brackets that are red right now. So right now we have a for loop. We'll go over that in a sec, but I'm going to go ahead and delete that for now. So the first thing I want to go over is the data types. So we have a few different data types that are all built in. The first one we'll go over is an integer, which are our numbers. So to specify an integer, we'll say int, which stands for integer. We'll call it a, the variable name, and we'll set it equal to the number 3. Now, if you're used to Python, you won't have to, you probably aren't used to this, but at the end of every single line, we have to add a semicolon to specify that we've ended this line. Now, after we've done this, we've now declared an integer called a that is equal to 3. Now, to print things to our console on the right, in Dart, we just have to say print, and then we specify whatever we want to print. So we'll go ahead and print the variable a. We'll end with a semicolon. When we click run, it'll take a little bit. All right, and when we see the number 3 is printed to our console. Now, the next data type that's also a number is called double. So the difference between numbers in Dart is that we have to specify if we want to have a decimal or not. So we'll go ahead and call this double b, specify 4.5 as what it's going to be equal to. And then to print this out, we'll go ahead and say print b. Oop, forgot a semicolon. And when it prints, we'll see 4.5. Now, it's important that anytime you want to add a decimal, you have to specify that what you're using is a double. And the reason why is because if we try to set a to 3.5, what we'll see is that an error will show up, as you can see with the underlined red line. And we'll see this error show up in the bottom right that says a value of type double cannot be assigned to a value of type int. So it's important that we specify our data types, and we have to make sure that once we declare it as something as an int, we don't reassign it to something as a double, or as we're going to go over next, a string. So a string is how we specify different words or characters. So we'll say a string is C, a string C, and we'll set it equal to hello. And let's go ahead and print that as well now. And we'll see hello show up in the console in a moment. And there we go. So a string is basically just a set of different characters that we kind of group together, and we put it between a double quotes, basically. We also have the option to use single quotes as well if we wanted to. So by opening up some single quotes and say hello as well. And this should also work and run. And as you can see, it hasn't changed at all. And we get no errors. So, and also if you're seeing this stuff on the bottom right, all it's saying is that it's just we're not using the variables. We don't have to really worry about that too much. So the other data type I wanted to go over is a Boolean, which is going to be, we'll call B. And Booleans are basically true and false. And we specify Booleans with the bool keyword right here. And we can say true or false. I'm sure you guys all know what true and false means, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. So the other thing I wanted to go over is how do we concatenate strings? So what happens if we have a string called C that is equal to hello, and we'll have another string called C2, and we'll say world. And I'm going to use double quotes here because I just feel like it, because I want to show you that it doesn't really matter if it's between double or single quotes. Now, what happens if I want to print hello world? Well, we have a few different ways of doing that. So we can say C plus C2 within the parentheses of our print statement here. We click run, take a little bit, and we'll see hello world. There's no space in between right now, but it should be all right. Now, what happens if we did want to add that space? It would be a little bit annoying if we had to add a bunch of pluses, like, we have C plus, and we'll create a space, and plus C2, right? Now, if we add the semicolon, if we run this, we should get a space between hello world. And we do. But the issue is that this looks really, really ugly. This is kind of a lot of typing for no real reason. So there's another way that we can use this, and this is how we'll be able to print strings that may contain variables as well. So let me go ahead and delete what we have in there, and what we can do is within either single or double quotes, I'm going to go ahead and use single quotes, we can say C, which is a variable, or let me go back one sec. If we do the $C, then we're specifying that we're going to be using a variable here, and then we add a space, and we do $C2. Notice that I've added a space between these two, and when I click run, it prints out hello world still. So what you'll see is that instead of adding all those pluses, we have another option for printing, and when it comes to variables, we can print variables this way. By just adding a $sign in front of our variable within our single or double quotes, and we'll be able to print out this whole, whatever we might want to print. And we can see that we can do this with any variable. This includes if we wanted to print out, say, this integer, a. So if we add $sign and then a right there, we should see hello 3 show up now. And we do. So this is how we'll end up printing different variables. You just have to specify the $sign and then whatever variable you might want to be using to print it out. And if we want to just print out variables on their own, we can just say the variable as well. We can print out true, for example, by just saying D, as we've been doing. And it's, my bird runs, there you go, it says true. So that was just a really, really quick, brief overview of those very basic data types that I wanted you guys to go over. And I hope I haven't lost any of you, but it shouldn't be too complicated. What I hope you guys see is data types between different languages are all basically the same. We call them the same things. We might have to specify them in a different way by adding a different keyword, like Boolean, for example. You have to say bool instead of Boolean as an entire word. So what we'll do next now is let's go ahead and go over a data structure, which is going to be a list. So for those of you coming from TypeScript or Java, you guys might be familiar with the term array. For Python, you guys already know what a list is, but essentially arrays and lists are the same thing in the Dart language. So all it does is that if we want to make a sequence of different integers or strings or whatever we want, then we can create a list and we can call them by each individual place in this list as well, and we'll go over that in a sec. So to create a list, you just say the keyword list, and then we say the variable name, which let's call it a list. We'll set it equal to something that is within brackets. So within these brackets, we then specify each individual element in this list by just separating them by commas. So we'll create a list of numbers that says 3, 5, and 7. We'll add in our semicolon at the end. Let's go ahead and print this list as well. So when we click Run, we'll go ahead and we see in our console this list of numbers show up. Now, right now, this list, as it is, doesn't really have a specified type. So I know in Python, you guys don't really necessarily have to specify type. But in Dart, it's going to be very important that we do. And while there are ways that we can not have to specify the data type, and we'll go over those in a sec, we're going to go ahead and make sure that we do for the simple sake that we can control our data. So right now, this list has a data type of dynamic. Let me quickly go over dynamic as well in a sec. But right now, what you can see is that between the dynamic is specified between less than, and this greater than symbol. So what that shows us is how we're supposed to specify the data type of a list. We just have to add in this less than symbol. We'll say this is it, since it's an integer list, we say the word int and then greater than symbol. And now when we run this, it should still all work. It does. And then when we highlight over by double clicking on a list, we'll see that this list is now assigned to an integer list. And this means that we can't say if we take out this 5, we can't put in hello in this list now. We'll see that we get an error. It says that the element of type string cannot be assigned to a list type int, which means we can't just put in strings now into this list. Well, before we could have, and I'll show you that we could have, just as an example. So if we take away this keyword int again, you see that we no longer get the arrow. We're allowed to do that. But when we're working in Flutter, we're always going to specify the type of the list that we'll be working with using this. So we saw just earlier this data type called dynamic. So dynamic, what it lets us do is it lets us reassign a variable to any data type. Doesn't matter what we started off with. So as we saw earlier, we can't assign A to a string. We can't assign this string C over here to equal a number either right now. But when we say the word dynamic, and we'll assign it to a dynamic, and we set it equal to the letter L, just for an example. And then when let's go ahead and try to reassign it, we say a dynamic, and we're going to set it equal to the number 3. We'll see that we get no errors showing up on the left. We just have this error here. Let me go ahead and get rid of hello. And we see that we get no error. This means that we're using dynamic, we're allowed to assign a variable that is dynamic to any sort of data type at any sort of time. And we'll see the use case of this when we start working with API data, but I don't want to go into that because it'll get a little bit complicated. So the one last thing I want to do when it comes down to declaring variables is I want to go over one last thing that is called final. So let me go ahead and delete what we have here, this print statement. And I want to talk about this keyword called final. So let's say we have a final, by typing in final, int, and we'll call it a, and we'll set it equal to 3. So what final does, this keyword right here, in front of the variable declaration, it says that now we can no longer change the value of this variable a. And we can see when we try to do that, when we say a equals 5, we'll get an error. And it says that the variable a can only be set once, and it references line 3, which is right here. So we're going to be using final a few times. Anytime we want to make sure that a variable that we're using, we don't want it to change whatsoever. And of course, if you guys feel like we're going a little bit fast, again, don't worry too much. I just want to make sure you guys get a feel for what the syntax is and have seen it before. And when you start using Flutter, all of this should make perfect sense to you. Again, because we'll actually be using it in concrete examples. So I'm going to go ahead and clear out our main method, and I'm going to start going over conditionals. So in Python, you guys, again, aren't used to brackets. And the way conditionals work in Dart is exactly the same as you might see in TypeScript or Java, where we have an if statement, and you say if, or let me go ahead and create some variables real quick. I'm going to create an int a equals 3. I'm going to create another int, we'll call it b equals 5. So for our if statement, we'll specify a conditional statement within these parentheses right here. So all the conditional statements are the same as in basically every language, including Python, where we have a bunch of different ways to do it, and say, is A greater than B? And then what we say, what we want to happen if that's the case, is we create these parentheses, these brackets right here. And we'll open these up, and now we are allowed to type in what we want to happen if A is equal to B. And we'll go ahead and print A is bigger. And we'll put a semicolon at the end of that. Let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So nothing prints, and obviously that's the case because A is greater than B. Now what happens if we say that if A is less than B? Then we'll see that the code does run, and we do get that A is bigger than B, or A is less than, A is less than B. Should change the print statement. Now, what happens if we want to create see what happens if this is not the case? Well, to do that, then we specify an else statement at the end of an if. So at the close of these if braces, we'll say else. So, and then open up some braces again. So what we then can say is what we want to happen anytime this case up here, if A is less than B, we want to say what happens if that's not the case, if we end up with a situation where A is actually greater than or equal to B. So we'll go ahead and print that A is not bigger or not less than B. I'll go ahead and run this. And we see that nothing's changed, but let me go ahead and change these variables. I'll make A 6 now. We see that A is not less than B. And of course that's the case because 6 is not less than 5. And we see that the else statement runs now. Now what happens if we want something specific to happen if instead, whenever it's equal to? So let me go ahead and delete this right here. And we'll go ahead and delete this else for now. So what happens if we want to have something else happen if A is equal to B now? So what we can do is we can create an else if statement. So we say else if, and then we're allowed to put in another conditional. We'll say if A is equal to, and we do equal to with double equals, B. And then inside these brackets, we're allowed to say what we want to happen. So we can say A equals B. And let's go ahead and create a case where what happens if it's neither less than B or equal to B, which essentially means in this else statement, we'll run it any time that A is greater than B. And we'll go ahead and say print A is bigger than B. And let's go ahead and make A equal to 5 to see this else if statement run. And we see A equals B. So we can of course, keep playing around with it. We can see how this else statement will work if we end it with an A that is greater than B, which we can just put A equals 6. we see A is bigger than B. So those are conditionals. We'll use them every now and then. But I also want to show you one other case of a conditional that is really convenient if we just want to have a one-line conditional statement. So what we'll do is I'll show you something called a ternary operator. So this is just a fancy word for a one-line if-then statement. The way we can do this is by specifying a condition, and we can do that by doing first our condition. We'll say if A is bigger than B. And then when we do that, we then add a question mark. Now what this effectively does is this says that we're going to check is A equal than B. And then the first thing that we put here is going to be what happens if this is true. So if A is bigger than B, we're going to go ahead and print A is bigger. And then we can also specify what if that's not the case. And we can do that by adding a colon. Now by putting this colon here, we'll go ahead and print A is not bigger than B. And we'll end this with a semicolon. So what this whole statement does is it'll check a conditional. In this case, we're checking if A is bigger than B. And we specify this with this question mark. And then we'll say what happens if it's true. And then what happens if it's false. So right now, A is bigger than 5. So when we run this, we should see that A is bigger. And it does. And just to show you that this does work, we'll say A is equal to 3 now. And we'll run this as well. It comes up. Okay, and we see that A is not bigger than B. So this is a really convenient way for running a one-line if statement. If you just have a quick little if-then or if-else statement that you want to write, you can easily do it in just one line by just doing this ternary operator. So now that we've gone over that, I want to go over for loops. So for loops are very different, I would say, than what you might see in Python. It's the same thing that you would see in TypeScript, in Java, and JavaScript, but in Python, you're going to have to get used to the syntax a bit if you're coming from Comp 110 right now. So we'll go ahead and make a for loop by saying the word for. Now, after specifying for, we create some parentheses, and we're going to have to specify 3 different things. First thing is we're going to have to specify a variable that we're going to use as our incrementer. So we'll go ahead and say int I equals 0. After we do this, we then put in a semicolon to say that this is our incrementing variable. Now we're going to continue on, and we're going to now specify a condition. Now for every for loop, we always have to specify what happens what are the conditions that we should go on and loop again. So to do so, then we would specify here, and we'll say if I is less than 5. So as long as I is less than 5, we're going to keep going through this little loop that we're going to make. And we're going to, in the last thing, after making another semicolon, we're going to have to increment our incrementer. And basically we're specifying what should happen at the end of this loop each time. We're going to go ahead and increment I, and we can do that with I++. So I++ is essentially the same as I equals I plus 1. But I++ is a very convenient way of just writing this, so it just increases I by 1 each time. So to specify the body of our for loop, unlike in Python where you would put in a colon here and then enter and then tab, we're going to have to put in our brackets as we've been doing. And then we're going to open up the for loop body, and we're going to go ahead and print I. So what should happen here is that we're going to start this for loop. We're going to create a variable I, and we're going to basically print what I is. And then at the end of it, we're going to increment I, and then we're going to see is I still less than 5. And if it is, then we're going to go into this for loop and print I again. So when we run this, we should see I getting incremented up to 4. And that's exactly what happens. We get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then once we increment I the last time, we get 5. 5 is no longer less than 5, and we're not going to run the for loop again, and we'll end. So that's how you make a basic for loop. we're going to be using these every now and then. In Flutter, it's not required that we use for loops whatsoever. I just want to make sure that you guys know how to make them if you have to. While loops work the same way, where while you put your condition right here, just like you did before. So you can say if A is less than B, and then you write your body in here, and you have to make sure that you do have some way that you're making your way to B. So in this case, we can say A++, and eventually we'll work our way out. Obviously, I'm getting a bunch of errors because I haven't declared this, but I just want to make you aware of the while loop syntax as well. So let me go ahead and check on chat to make sure that people are still keeping up. Doesn't look like you're saying anything thus far. So, hey Cecilia, how are you doing?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
I think people are following along pretty well.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm not going too fast. So thus far we've gone over data types. We specify that we have different ones, such as int, double, string, and boolean. And then we have another thing called lists. So now that we've learned those things, I want to quickly do a really, really easy hands-on. So let me first off show you. Let's create a list real quick, an int list. And we'll call this A, and we'll assign this to a list that contains the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So what I want us to do is, well, first off, I want to show you how do you access one of these different positions in this list. So to say, let's try to access this number 2 right here. The way we can do that is by saying A, and then we specify the indice, or the index of this variable. So lists in Dart, like practically every other language, are 0 index, meaning this first one has an index of 0, this 2 has an index of 1, this 3 has an index of 2, and then so on. So to access that 2, we can say A, and then within these brackets, we'll then say that we want the index that's located in 1. When we print this, we'll see that it should print out 2. And we do. So the reason why I want you to see this is because I want you guys to go ahead and do a little hands-on on your own. We'll take a little break here just for me to answer any questions if you guys have any, and then also for you guys to try something on your own real quick with this syntax so you can see if you're getting it or not. What I want you to do is create a for loop, and I'll go ahead and write actually I'm going to go ahead and let you guys try to figure this out on your own first. What I want you guys to do is I want you to print out every other character in this list right here. And just to help you out, to get access to the length of this list right here, we can just say a dot, and we get a bunch of methods here. We can do a dot length. And that'll tell us how large this list is, which is currently the length of 5. So what I want you guys to do is go ahead and print out every other integer within this list using a for loop. I'll go ahead and give you about a minute to do that, and then I'll go over that. Okay, so I think that should be enough time, hopefully, for you guys to have done that. So let's go ahead and go over it. So first we're going to create a for loop, and we're going to create our counter here. So we're going to set I equal to 0. We'll put in a semicolon. We're going to say as long as I is less than the length of this array, so a dot length. And then now here comes the part where we're going to have to make sure we know what we're doing here, which is we're going to want to print out every other one. Now, obviously we can do, there's a few different ways we could do this, but the easiest way to definitely do this is by making sure we increment I by 2 each time. So we're going to do this by doing plus equals 2. What this does is this is the same as saying I equals I plus 2. So plus equals 2. Should make it so we're going to go every other index starting from 0. And at that point we can just do print. And then inside this print statement we do a, and then inside we'll put I. Let's go ahead and run this. And we should see that we get 135, I mean, which we do. So hopefully you guys got that and it wasn't too complicated for you guys. Obviously syntax it takes a little bit to get used to, but Dart's syntax is really nice. It's the exact same thing as what you would see in Java thus far. Python, it's a little bit more difficult, but hopefully you guys aren't getting lost. So I want to go over functions, and then from there, we should have a little bit of time, and we'll play around with Flutter a little bit using this same tool that we're using right now. So last thing will be something called, last thing will be functions, I'm sorry. So to create a function, the way we can do that is, first off, let's go outside of here. The way function syntax works is that we first have to specify a return type. So here we have a return type of void for our main function. So we'll create a function called, let's first off return void, and then we'll go ahead and call it print something. So after we do this, we then have to specify if we have any parameters by putting in these parentheses here. So right now for this function, we're not going to add any parameters. So we're just going to put in some empty parentheses, and we'll create our function body using brackets as we've been doing. What we're going to do is we're just going to say print, and we're going to say something. Now to then call this function, we're going to go ahead and go into our main, and we're just going to say print something, and we're just going to, just like that, we'll be able to call our function by just simply writing down its name. Then if it had any parameters, we'd pass it to it here within these parentheses, and then we end it with a semicolon. And when we run this, we should see something show up in our console. And we do. Now let's make this a little bit more complicated. So, or not complicated, but a little bit more complex. So now as a parameter, we're going to go ahead and take in a string, and we're going to print out whatever that string is. So the way we do that is we have to specify the type of each parameter that we're going to get. So we're going to have to say string, we're going to say text. And text is the name of the string that we're supposed to get. We see an error showing up now because it's expecting an argument. We'll get to that in a sec. But in here, we're going to say, instead of print something, we're going to print our text that we get. And now, back in our main method, we have print something, and we're going to be able to specify, now we have to specify what we want as our parameter. I'm going to print hello world. Very basic. And we're going to go ahead and run this, and it should print out hello world, which it does. And to add more parameters, we would simply just add a comma, and we could specify an int if we want. We'll just call it a for now. I'm not going to really do anything with it. We'll just have, and up here we'll have to specify a number, give it 7. Just get rid of the error. But obviously, if the syntax isn't too difficult, all you're doing is you're just specifying different parameters right here, and we can add extra things. Now, what if we wanted to actually, get a return type out of this? Now, we gave it this number 7. We're going to go ahead and add a return statement to this. So to do this, we're first going to change this return type. I'm going to say the return type is int, and we're going to say return in this function body. We're going to return the int we just got. for just simplicity's sake. And now what this function does is that it'll return us an int. Now, in our main method, we can choose to do something with this or not. We can just keep it as is, and the function should still work fine. But if we wanted to, say, assign a variable, we'll call it int b equals, or we'll just call it, we'll first off start off by declaring it, int b. We're going to go ahead and set b equal to print something. And underneath this, let's print b to see what happens. And we should get the 7 back. And we do. So we get hello world. We're going to be returning this a, which is going to get assigned to b now. And then we're going to print b inside this main function now. So hopefully that wasn't too complicated. Again, it's the same syntax that you might see in Java, TypeScript. For those coming from Python, this will be a little bit more different, but not too complicated, hopefully. So that was the main stuff I wanted to get done today. The other one, well, I'm not going to go over classes for now. And the reason why is because I don't want to confuse anyone from Comp 110, who's currently taking Comp 110, because you guys probably haven't gone over classes just yet. But what a class is just, it takes in fields, and it basically can build objects using classes. But again, I'm not going to go over it. When you start working with Flutter, you'll see that it's not a very, very big deal whether or not you know it, and we'll get plenty of practice with it hands-on as well. So with the remaining time, we have about 8 minutes. I wanted to get a chance to show you what Flutter really is all about, and get a chance to actually use a little bit of Flutter right now. So what you guys should do is go ahead and at the top here, go ahead and go over to the right side and click Samples. So in the samples, we see a lot of different things. We see a lot of different Dart files that are pre-built. And we also have a few Flutter files. This is the Flutter icon right here. So go ahead and click on Counter in Samples. And then you'll see a whole Flutter app show up. Now this looks really complicated, but it's not, and we'll obviously go over it. But this is now currently run on the right side, and we see that you've pushed the button this many times. We see an app bar up here too. And when we click on this number up here changes by 1. You can click it as many times as you want, and it'll keep increasing. So what I wanted to do real quick is just break down what we see on the right and compare it to what we see on the left in the text here. So the very first thing, from top to bottom, is we see that we have this little app bar here, which we talked about earlier in the slides. And we have some text within it. So let's go ahead and look at the code and see if we can find the words app bar. So we start off here with my app. So again, a lot of this is just boilerplate code. You'll never have to write down any of this. All of this stuff right here will come pre-built in Flutter, and we'll just have to type in like a few words, and this will all be made for you. So if we go on down to right over here to my home page right here, and we go down and we see this return, which is scaffold. We'll see the word app bar show up, which is what I was talking about earlier. And what we see is this app bar has a title property, and it's equal to some text, and it says widget.title. And we have Flutter demo homepage here right now. But let's go ahead and change that to, go ahead and delete what we have here. And within double quotes, we'll go ahead and say my app bar. And let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. What we see is that the text is now changed in the app bar. So what this shows you is that we have this thing called app bar right here. We specified it just by writing app bar and then with a colon. And we say app bar, and within those parentheses we have a title, and we put down some text and whatnot. So what I want to do right now is that I just want to show you that what that kind of looks like and what an app sort of looks like right now. But I want to quickly go through a really simple example in the last 5 minutes we have here. So go ahead and click on New Pad, and then when you click on that, it says Create New Pad. Go ahead and click OK. Click on Flutter. When you run this, should get hello world showing up. Again, if this looks a little complicated, don't worry about it. Most of this is pre-made inside Flutter, and we'll obviously go over this in the next lesson, of course, and we'll take it very, very slow. So when we look at this app, we have this thing called a scaffold, we have a body, which is a center widget, and then we go into a child called my widget, which takes us down here. And all this my widget is doing is that it's just giving us some text with a style to it. So what I wanted to do is go ahead and delete this text right here. Let's just create a container. And in this container, we'll have to add a semicolon because it's a return statement. Go ahead and change the color of it by saying the words color. Let's do, and we have a lot of colors available to us on their own and using the material design, and we can just do this by saying colors dot. Let's make it, and we see a bunch of them show up here. Let's make it red. And click run. See a giant red box show up. So what this has done is that now we've made our first sort of Flutter changes, and by creating a simple container that has a color of red. And I want to take it one step further by going ahead and adding some text to it. And we can do this by just adding a comma, specifying child. And after saying child, we add a colon, and we're just going to say text and say hello world inside some parentheses here. And click run. And we see hello world, and you see that now this red box is only taking up the text. And we'll go over that and all that stuff, but I just wanted you guys to at least see a little bit of Flutter. Again, I don't want you guys to get too confused. We're mainly going over Flutter in the very next lecture. We'll take it super slow. I'll send you the instructions in how to get everything set up, and we'll start going over some of the very basic widgets, how to lay everything out, and it'll just be text and rows and columns and working with all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and end it here now that we only have 2 minutes left, but I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope my biggest hope is that you guys didn't get too lost. This main lecture was just to show you, what is Flutter, get some of you guys interested in, why it's an important skill to learn, and hopefully you guys don't get too lost as well. And I also wanted to go over the Dart language. This isn't going to be a super important lecture either. I just wanted you guys to be familiar with the syntax so that we can get started with Flutter and you guys don't start off getting so confused as well. So I'll go ahead and check out comments, and let's see if anyone has anything that they've said. Good to see that you had some fun, Jerry. Thank you. Yes, of course. We'll be able to go over how to install Flutter in the future. I'm going to make a quick little YouTube video, probably around 10-20 minutes, probably not longer than that. I'll go over that you have to have Git installed, how to get the Flutter SDK, how to get an emulator running, and all that jazz. In all just one YouTube video. And the big thing I want you guys to remember is I want to make sure that you have that set up so that people don't get lost, because obviously we have different internet connections and people might not have the same computer specs, so it might take longer for some people to install stuff during the live stream. So I want to make sure you guys have that all set up beforehand, before we get started and working the IDE. And the other thing I also really quickly wanted to specify is this looks really complicated because you're not getting autofill suggestions. And in IDE, like remembering, what is a container and whatnot, that stuff, this sort of website makes it look really complicated, but it's not. As you would type something like container, you would see some autofill suggestions come up. They'll tell you, what do you want the child to be? Do you want it to be a text? And we'll go through all of that once we get the IDE installed.
All right, that's awesome. Yeah. Just tell them like the next part is gonna be next day, same time.
Yeah, next Sunday, yeah. So the very next part of this Flutter tutorial will be on Sunday, same time, 3 o'clock. And I hope you guys will be there because it'll be a lot of fun. We'll finally be able to actually work with the thing I've been promising, which is Flutter. This is just a very important lesson in terms of being familiar with the Dart syntax because it is a new language, and I know a lot of you guys haven't ever learned a new language before. So I want to make sure that nobody really gets lost as we go along. And if you do feel like you need more practice with the Dart syntax, don't worry because as we go over Flutter, you get plenty of experience with it, and it's a super simple language to use.
All right, awesome.
All right.
Turn off the live.
Yeah. All right. You guys have a good one.